Welcome back to Poirot Files. Today, we're diving into an intriguing mystery, Hercule Poirot and the blackmailer who was killed before he could be paid. A tale of deception, secrets, and Poirot's brilliant investigative mind. But before that, I want to say, you've shown me so much love and I truly appreciate it. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Grab your coffee and let's get started. Chapter 1. An Unusual Invitation. A dense fog clung to the streets of London as I stepped into our flat, the unmistakable scent of bergamot wafting from a teacup near Poirot's elbow. He sat, as he often did, at the small writing desk, his head inclined toward a newspaper, but his sharp green eyes flicked up the moment I entered. "Ah, mon ami, you return precisely on time. A most remarkable thing has occurred." I set my walking stick by the door and removed my hat, shaking off the damp. "Oh, what's that, Poirot?" He reached delicately for an envelope on the table, his neatly manicured fingers tapping its surface. A letter, Hastings, and not just any letter, one of intrigue. Curious, I took the envelope. The handwriting on it was strong, confident, yet hurried. I broke the seal and unfolded the note inside. "My dear Hastings, it has been some years since last we met, and I hope you are in good health. I write to you now with an urgent and delicate matter, one that requires both discretion and, dare I say, the assistance of your remarkable friend, Monsieur Poirot. I cannot say more in writing, but I implore you to visit me at Colthorpe Manor in Surrey at your earliest convenience. There is much to discuss, and time is of the essence. Your old friend, Sir Reginald Colthorpe." "Colthorpe?" I exclaimed. "By Jove, Poirot, I haven't seen him in nearly a decade. A fine chap, ex-army, made his fortune in shipping, and now spends his days in the countryside. I wonder what could be so urgent." Poirot, ever the picture of composure, steepled his fingers. "The letter, Hastings, it is most curious. Observe. He is vague, yet insistent. There is une affaire, a matter of great delicacy, and yet he dares not write even a single detail. Why?" "Perhaps he fears prying eyes," I suggested. Poirot's moustache twitched. "Exactement. A man fears prying eyes only when there is something of value to be stolen, or a secret to be kept." "Then you mean to go?" Poirot rose, adjusting the crease in his impeccably pressed trousers. "My little grey cells, they demand satisfaction. We leave on the first train to Surrey." Colthorpe Manor was a grand and brooding estate, its grey stone walls rising starkly against the rolling hills beyond. A bitter wind greeted us as we stepped from the hired car, gravel crunching underfoot. The manor's windows, darkened by age, reflected the dying light of day like empty eyes. A butler, thin and solemn, ushered us into a vast drawing-room where a fire crackled in the marble hearth. There, by the mantel, stood Sir Reginald Colthorpe. "Hastings," he cried, advancing with outstretched hands. "By heavens, it is good to see you." I clasped his hand warmly. "And you, old chap, you gave me quite a turn with that letter." He let out a dry chuckle, though the tension in his posture betrayed unease. "Ah, yes, well, there's a great deal to discuss." His gaze flickered past me to Poirot. "And you must be the famous detective." Poirot inclined his head. "At your service, Sir Reginald." Before another word could be exchanged, a woman's voice cut through the air. "Reginald, you have guests, and I was not informed." A lady of striking beauty, though her features were drawn with worry, stood in the doorway. Sir Reginald cleared his throat. "My wife, Eleanor." "Eleanor, this is Captain Hastings and Monsieur Poirot." She hesitated for only a moment before offering a polite smile. "Of course. How lovely to meet you both." Her daughter, Clara, entered behind her, a pale slip of a girl with sharp blue eyes that observed us with quiet intelligence. Others soon followed. Mr. Harold Lexham, the family solicitor, his face a study of sharp angles and thinly veiled calculation. Miss Violet Harborough, a socialite with a reputation as scandalous as it was intriguing, and Major Archibald Stern, his military posture rigid, his expression unreadable. Dinner was served, though the meal was strained with an unspoken tension. The air was thick with something unsaid, an unease that simmered just beneath the surface. Poirot ate delicately, his gaze flitting from one guest to the next. I, however, could not ignore the whispered exchanges, the looks stolen across the table. It was Miss Harborough who finally broke the silence. She set down her glass and gave a short, bitter laugh. "Oh, for heaven's sake, must we all continue to pretend? We know why we're here, don't we?" There was a sharp intake of breath from Lady Colthorpe. "Violet—" "No, Eleanor, let's not act as if we're fools." She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with something between amusement and fear. "A certain someone has been writing letters, demands, threats. A blackmailer, lurking in the shadows, holding secrets over our heads. And now we are all gathered in one place." Silence fell, thick and suffocating. My eyes darted to Poirot, who sat utterly still, his expression unreadable. Sir Reginald exhaled heavily. "It is true. Someone has been extorting us. Letters have arrived, each one more threatening than the last. We have no idea who it is, nor what they intend to do next." A log in the fireplace cracked, the sound echoing through the vast dining room. Poirot finally spoke, his voice soft but commanding. "And tell me, mes amis, what is the price that has been demanded?" Sir Reginald's fingers clenched into a fist. £10,000. "And have you agreed to pay?" There was a pause. Then, reluctantly, Sir Reginald admitted, "Tomorrow morning a payment is to be made." Poirot's expression darkened. "Then I suggest, mon ami, that we do not sleep too soundly tonight, for I suspect the blackmailer does not intend to wait for his prize." The candlelight flickered, casting shifting shadows against the walls. In that moment, a shiver ran down my spine, for I had the distinct and terrible feeling that we had stepped into something far more dangerous than we had anticipated, and somewhere in the depths of Colthorpe Manor, someone was watching. Chapter 2. The Murder at Midnight. The stillness of the night was shattered by the sharp crack of a gunshot. It echoed through the halls of Colthorpe Manor, rousing its inhabitants from uneasy slumber. Poirot, ever the light sleeper, was already halfway into his dressing gown when a frantic knocking sounded at his door. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, there has been an incident." The voice belonged to Mr. Godfrey, the butler, his usual composed tone betraying a tremor of distress. Hastings, still groggy, struggled into his robe as Poirot straightened his lapels. "An incident, mon ami?" Poirot murmured. "No, I think not. A murder." They followed Godfrey through the dimly lit corridors, past the grand staircase, to the study at the far end of the east wing. The air smelled faintly of smoke and something sharper, cordite, the unmistakable residue of a gunshot. The door to the study stood ajar. Inside, Edgar Royce lay slumped over the great mahogany desk, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. His face, partially illuminated by the flickering glow of the fireplace, bore an expression frozen in surprise. A thin trickle of blood had traced its way down from the neat bullet hole in his temple. Beside him, a dueling pistol lay with an aiguille, almost theatrical precision, as if carefully placed rather than dropped. Sir Reginald Colthorpe arrived at the threshold, his face pale. "Good heavens," he whispered, gripping the doorframe. "Edgar Roy's dead." Poirot stepped forward, his keen eyes taking in the scene with swift precision. "Oui, monsieur. Colthorpe. Dead, and quite recently." Eleanor Colthorpe, wrapped in a heavy shawl, clutched at her husband's arm. "I knew that man would bring trouble," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nothing but misfortune follows his kind." Clara, their daughter, hovered near the doorway, her expression unreadable. Behind her, Major Archibald Stern's usually ruddy complexion had gone ashen. Miss Violet Harborough's blue eyes were wide, her hands twisting in the folds of her dressing gown. Harold Lexam, the lawyer, pushed his spectacles up his nose. With a shaking hand, Poirot moved to the fireplace, where a charred scrap of paper still smouldered in the grate. He plucked it out with the fire tongs, examining the remains. "Ah, most unfortunate," he murmured. "Someone wished to destroy evidence, but one must always be thorough." Hastings peered over his shoulder. The writing was mostly lost to the flames, but a few words remained legible. "Ruin you if... payment. Last warning. A blackmail..."
"Note," Hastings muttered. Poirot turned to the body once more. "Regardez, Hastings. Note the angle of the gun, the positioning of the hand. Most unnatural, n'est-ce pas?"
Hastings frowned. "It does seem a bit... staged." Poirot's fingers hovered over the desk, barely touching the surface. Then he sniffed the air delicately. "Brandy," he murmured. He lifted the crystal tumbler near Royce's elbow. "Untouched," Harold Lexam coughed. "He was an odd fellow. Perhaps he poured himself a drink and then... well..." Poirot gave him a sharp glance. "Perhaps." He turned back to the body and reached for the dead man's wrist, lifting it gently. There, beneath, the sleeve of his jacket, was a telltale mark. Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "Monsieur Godfrey," he said suddenly, turning to the butler, "who discovered the body?" "I did, sir," Godfrey replied. "I was securing the house for the night when I heard the shot." "And was the door locked?" "No, sir. It was slightly ajar." Poirot nodded. "And the gun, an antique dueling pistol?" "No?" Sir Reginald's face darkened. "Yes, it belongs to me." "It was displayed in the drawing-room." Poirot raised his brows. "Displayed, but now it is here, beside a murdered man." Silence fell over the group. Poirot turned back to the body once more, his gaze sharpened as he bent down, lifting the hem of the dead man's trouser. "Eh bien," he murmured. "A most intriguing puzzle." Hastings glanced down. "What is it, Poirot?" Poirot straightened. "A missing cufflink, Hastings, and note the scent. Delicate, unmistakable. Perfume." A chill passed through the gathered guests. Poirot turned slowly, his gaze sweeping over them. "Someone in this house wished Monsieur Royce dead, and they have gone to great pains to misdirect us." Miss Harborough let out a nervous laugh. "Surely
"You don't think—" Poirot lifted a hand. "I think, mademoiselle, that the little grey cells must work most diligently tonight." And with that, he turned back to the body, his sharp eyes missing nothing.
Chapter 3. The First Clues and Red Herrings. The air in the study remained thick with smoke and tension as the assembled guests exchanged uneasy glances. Poirot, standing with his hands clasped behind his back, turned his attention once more to the charred scrap of paper he had rescued from the fireplace. The last surviving word, faint but legible, read, "Betrayal." A single word, yet it carried the weight of a hidden truth. Poirot tapped the paper lightly against his fingertips, his expression unreadable. Hastings, standing close by, leaned in. "Not much to go on," he murmured. "Ah, but mon ami, sometimes a single word is more illuminating than an entire letter. Betrayal. It suggests a personal matter, does it not?" Poirot glanced at the pale, uneasy faces before him. "And in this house, there is someone who knows exactly what that word meant to Edgar Royce." A soft, sharp intake of breath drew his attention. Clara Colthorpe, usually composed, had turned an alarming shade of white. Her hands, clenched tightly at her sides, trembled slightly. Poirot's gaze settled on her. "Mademoiselle," he said, gently. "You are troubled." Clara hesitated, her throat working as though she struggled to form words. Then, with sudden resolve, she straightened. "Yes, I am," she admitted. I knew what that letter contained. There was a collective
Stir.
Sir Reginald turned sharply to his daughter. "Clara, what are you saying?" Her gaze darted to Poirot, then back to her father. "I was being blackmailed," she said in a low voice, "but not about myself." Poirot inclined his head slightly, his expression neutral. "Go on, mademoiselle." Clara's hands twisted together. "It was about someone close to me," she said haltingly. "Someone I was trying to protect." Sir Reginald's face darkened. "Who?" Clara hesitated, then shook her head. I can't say. Not yet." Poirot studied her closely. "And the payment? Did you intend to comply?" Clara's lips pressed together. I hadn't decided." He was asking for a great deal. Poirot considered her words. "A great deal? And yet someone silenced Monsieur Royce before he could collect. That is most interesting, is it not?" Clara shivered but said nothing more. Poirot turned to the others. "You will all oblige me by remaining here for a short while. I shall speak with each of you individually." One by one the guests were questioned in the drawing-room while Hastings took notes. Miss Violet Harborough, her fingers restlessly toying with the hem of her sleeve, was the first to offer something of interest.
"I saw someone," she whispered, leaning forward. "Just before the gunshot. A figure moving down the corridor. It was dark, but I know what I saw." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And you did not see who it was?" She hesitated. "No, only—"
That they were moving quickly, deliberately, Poirot considered. "And this was before the shot?" Miss Harborough nodded. "Yes, just a few seconds before." He made a slight bow of his head. "Merci, mademoiselle. That is most intriguing." Major Stern was next. The former military man sat rigidly, his jaw tight. "I was in the smoking room," he stated. "Hadn't left all evening." Poirot's expression did not change. "You were there alone?" The Major hesitated. "Yes." Poirot lifted a brow. "And you heard the shot?" "Of course." "But you did not go to investigate?" Another pause. "I assumed someone else would." Poirot's gaze remained steady. "Curious, is it not, a man of action, yet you waited?" The Major's face flushed slightly. "I wasn't sure what I'd heard at first." "Ah, but a gunshot. It is unmistakable, no?" Stern shifted. "It sounded muffled." Poirot's head tilted slightly. "Most interesting. Harold Lexam." The lawyer was less forthcoming. "I was in my room," he said stiffly. "Asleep." "Ah, but Monsieur Lexam, a lawyer is trained to observe. Tell me, did you notice anything unusual this evening?" Lexam swallowed. "No, nothing." Poirot said nothing for a long moment, merely studying the man. "Très bien, you may go." Poirot returned to the study, his mind ticking over the pieces of the puzzle. Something did not align. He moved toward the window, drawing back the heavy curtains. A sharp gust of wind greeted him, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth. He stepped out onto the stone ledge and let his gaze drop downward. There, half hidden in the grass, were muddied footprints. Someone had been outside the study window. Hastings, who had followed, frowned. "Good Lord, do you think someone was watching?" Poirot dusted his hands and turned back inside. "Ah, Hastings, that is the question, is it not? Was our unknown
visitor an observer or an intruder?" Hastings frowned. "But if someone was outside, doesn't that mean the shot could have come from there?" Poirot shook his head. "No, mon ami, the angle of the wound is clear. It came from inside."
this room?" Hastings ran a hand through his hair. "But then what does it mean?" Poirot's gaze swept the room once more, settling briefly on the empty brandy glass, then on the absent cufflink, and finally back to the fireplace. "It means, Hastings, that there is more to this matter than meets the eye, and that someone in this house is not telling us the truth." Hastings exhaled sharply.
"You think the murderer was the one being blackmailed?" Poirot smiled faintly. "That, mon ami, is a most logical conclusion." His fingers brushed once more over the burned letter in his pocket. Betrayal? It was a word that meant many things, and
Before the night was over, he would know exactly whom it had condemned. Chapter 4. The Will and the Secret Marriage. The fire in the study had burned low, casting flickering shadows on the panelled walls. Poirot stood at the hearth, his gaze distant yet intent, as if retracing the final moments of Edgar Royce's life. The weight of the case was beginning to settle into shape, though the edges remained blurred. Motive was becoming clearer, but opportunity still required careful dissection. Sir Reginald sat in a high-backed chair, his fingers drumming against the armrest, his face clouded with unease. His earlier bluster had faded, leaving a man caught between self-assurance and doubt. Finally, after a long silence, he spoke. "I changed my will recently," he admitted, the words reluctant. "I cut someone out." Poirot turned, his eyebrows lifting a fraction. "Ah, and may one inquire whom?" Sir Reginald hesitated. "It was a private matter." Poirot allowed a small pause, then said softly, "Monsieur, a man has been murdered." "Private matters? They have a way of becoming very public in such cases." Sir Reginald exhaled through his nose, his jaw tightening. "Very well. I removed Harold Lexam from my will." Hastings, who had been standing by the window, let out a surprised breath. "Your solicitor?" Sir Reginald gave a curt nod. "Lexam has been my lawyer for years, but I recently discovered irregularities." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "Irregularities?" "A discrepancy in some accounts. I confronted him. He denied it, of course, but I no longer trusted him. I planned to appoint new counsel." Poirot steepled his fingers. "And Monsieur Royce, he knew of this change?" Sir Reginald shifted uncomfortably. "Possibly, I can't say for certain." Poirot considered this, then moved toward the writing desk. "And this was done recently?" "Yes." The formal paperwork had not yet been completed, but I had made my intentions clear. Poirot nodded absently, his fingers brushing over the edge of the desk. "And yet Monsieur Lexam claimed to have been asleep at the time of the murder. A convenient alibi, n'est-ce pas?" Sir Reginald frowned. "You think he—" Poirot raised a hand. "I think nothing, monsieur, until I have the facts." A rustling sound caught his attention. Hastings had been rifling through the contents. of a small side table, and now he straightened, holding a folded piece of paper. "Poirot," he said, his voice tinged with urgency. "Look at this." Poirot took the slip of paper carefully. The handwriting was small and neat, the ink slightly smudged. At the bottom, 2 initials stood out in dark strokes. E.C. He glanced up sharply. "Eleanor Colthorpe?" Sir Reginald's expression darkened. "I sincerely doubt it." Poirot turned, the note over, scanning it with a keen eye. The words were brief, urgent. "Meet me before dinner." "It is important?" Poirot's gaze flicked towards Sir Reginald. "And did Mademoiselle Eleanor arrive before dinner?" "No," he said, his tone clipped. "She hasn't been here for months." Poirot tapped a finger against his chin. "Then perhaps another E.C. exists in this house." A light cough from the doorway made them all turn. Clara Colthorpe stood there, her face pale but composed. "I need to speak with you," she said quietly. Sir Reginald stiffened. "Clara—" "No, father, I need to tell the truth." Poirot inclined his head. "Mademoiselle, please, sit." She hesitated, then stepped into the room, folding her hands in her lap. "I was engaged," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Secretly." Hastings let out a small exclamation, and Sir Reginald swore. Under his breath, Poirot's gaze remained steady. "To whom, mademoiselle?" She swallowed hard. "To Michael Farrow." The name fell into the room like a stone into a still pond. Sir Reginald's face turned a shade deeper. "That wastrel? The man is a gambler, a fortune-seeker."
"He is not," Clara said fiercely. "You never gave him a chance." Poirot leaned forward. "And Monsieur Royce, he knew of this engagement?" Clara's lips trembled. "Yes," she whispered. "Did he threaten you?" A long silence. Then,
Slowly, she nodded. "He found out somehow. He told me if I didn't pay him, he would tell my father." Poirot's voice remained gentle. "And did you agree to his demands?" I didn't know what to do," she admitted. "I asked for time, but I didn't kill him, I swear it." Poirot nodded. "Tell me, mademoiselle, was Monsieur Farrow here tonight?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, I told him not to." "Come." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "But someone did come, did they not?" Clara's fingers twisted together.
Yes, there was a visitor. Before dinner. Someone came to the house, but I don't know who." Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. "And what happened to this visitor?" "They were turned away," she murmured. "The maid said—"
Sir Reginald refused to see them. Poirot turned towards Sir Reginald. "Monsieur, may I ask, who was this visitor?" Sir Reginald's expression was unreadable. "I don't know." Poirot regarded him for a long moment, then turned back to Clara. "Mademoiselle, I must ask you one more thing." She looked up. "Did you open the study window tonight?" She frowned. "No. Why?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Because someone did, and they did so with purpose." A soft gasp came from the doorway. Miss Harborough stood there, her expression tight with realization. "I didn't think it was important," she said hesitantly. "But now—" Poirot gestured for her to continue. She took a deep breath. "The study window, it was open before dinner. I noticed because the curtains were moving slightly in the breeze." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And did you close it?" She shook her head. "I meant to mention it, but I forgot." Poirot turned back to the window, gazing out into the night. "Then the question remains, who opened it?" No one answered. Hastings cleared his throat. "But why open the window if the shot was fired from inside?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, Hastings, that is what we must discover. But one thing is clear. Someone in this house is lying. The silence that followed was
heavy, and then from somewhere in the distance, the sound of a door creaking open echoed through the quiet house.
Chapter 5. The Disappearing. Alibi. A sharp creak cut through the silence of the house, and all heads turned instinctively. Poirot's eyes flickered toward the source of the sound, a door, somewhere in the hall, opening just enough to disturb the hush that had settled after his pronouncement. For a moment, no one moved. Then, with a swift, silent motion, Poirot strode toward the doorway, Hastings following close behind. The corridor beyond the study was dimly lit, its walls lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors who seemed to watch the unfolding drama with unchanging disapproval. Poirot's gaze swept the hallway. A door at the far end, a small service entrance, was slightly ajar. He pressed forward, his steps quick and precise, and pulled it open fully. Nothing. Only the cool night air pressing in, rustling the heavy drapes. Poirot exhaled softly, stepping back into the house. Hastings peered over his shoulder. "Gone," he muttered. "Whoever was here didn't want to be seen." Poirot gave a small nod, shutting the door with a decisive click. "Ah, but mon ami, they are seen, even in absence." They returned to the study, where Sir Reginald was speaking in low, urgent tones to Clara, who looked stricken. Miss Harborough hovered by the fireplace, twisting her hands together. Poirot's sharp gaze caught every nuance of the scene, the tension in Sir Reginald's shoulders, the way Clara's fingers trembled against the fabric of her dress. There was much unsaid in this room, but first, the facts. Poirot turned abruptly. "Hastings, let us reconstruct the timeline precisely." Hastings straightened. "Of course." Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. The dinner began at 7:30. All were present, except for the mysterious visitor who was turned away. At approximately 8:30, dinner concluded. Some guests retired to the drawing-room, others moved about the house. His gaze settled briefly on Clara, then continued. At 9:15, Edgar Royce was found dead in the study, a
pistol beside him, the door locked from the inside.
Sir Reginald exhaled sharply. "A suicide, as I said." Poirot shook his head. "No, monsieur, it was staged. The pistol had been wiped clean of fingerprints. Why, if the man had taken his own life?" A cold hush settled over the room. Poirot turned to Hastings. "The body, how was it positioned?" Hastings frowned. He was slumped in the chair, his right hand close to the gun. Poirot nodded. "And yet, you recall, the blood spatter was irregular." He moved toward the desk and pointed. "If he had shot himself in such a position, the blood would have pooled differently." "No, Hastings. Someone moved him after death." "Miss!" Harborough let out a soft gasp. Clara's face had gone pale. Poirot continued, his voice measured. "This was no suicide. It was murder made to appear as one." His gaze flickered toward Sir Reginald. "And when one attempts to disguise a crime, it is because the truth is more dangerous." Before Sir Reginald could reply, a sharp exclamation came from Hastings, who had been examining the carpet near the victim's chair. "Poirot, look at this." He bent down and retrieved a small, gleaming object from beneath the chair. He held it up, and in the dim light, the gold surface caught the glow of the dying fire. A cufflink. Poirot stepped forward and took it delicately between two fingers. His eyes gleamed as he turned it over. "Interesting." Sir Reginald frowned. "A cufflink?" But whose? Poirot examined the insignia on its surface and let out a small, satisfied sound. It belongs to Major Stern. The room reacted as if struck by a sudden gust of wind. Clara stiffened. Miss Harborough let out a quiet, "Oh," and Sir Reginald's brow furrowed deeply. "The Major?" Hastings asked. "But he said he had retired early." Poirot gave a knowing smile. "Ah, but now we see, non? His alibi is not so certain." Sir Reginald's expression darkened. "If Stern was here, why lie about it?" Poirot turned the cufflink between his fingers thoughtfully. "That, monsieur, is precisely what we must ask him." Before anyone could respond, a sudden strangled sound came from Sir Reginald. His hand flew to his throat, his face contorting in alarm. Poirot moved instantly. "Sir Reginald!" The older man staggered against the desk, gasping. His eyes were wild, unfocused. Poirot grabbed a glass from the table, sniffed it, then placed it down with a sharp motion. "Poison!" Clara shrieked. Hastings rushed forward, grabbing Sir Reginald's arm as he sagged. Poirot's movements were swift and precise. He reached into his pocket, withdrew a small vial, and tipped a few drops
onto a handkerchief, pressing it to Sir Reginald's lips. "Amyl nitrite," he said briskly. "It should counteract some effects, but we must move quickly." He turned to Hastings. "Fetch Dr. Langley at once." Hastings bolted from the room. Clara knelt by her father, her hands shaking. He was fine a moment ago." Poirot's
gaze swept the table. "The brandy," he murmured. "It was poured while we spoke." He lifted the decanter, inhaled, and nodded grimly. "Someone poisoned it," Miss Harborough let out a cry. "But who?" Poirot's gaze hardened. "Someone who wishes to silence Sir Reginald before he reveals too much." Sir Reginald let out a weak groan, his breathing ragged. Poirot turned back to him. "Monsieur, you must tell me, before it is too late, who would wish you dead?" Reginald's lips parted, his voice barely a whisper. I saw—" His eyes fluttered. Poirot leaned in. Who did you see?" But Sir Reginald's head lolled to the side, his breath steadied, his body going slack. Poirot exhaled sharply. He was unconscious, but alive. Clara let out a shuddering breath. "Thank God!" Poirot straightened, his gaze sharp. "Someone in this house has tried to cover their tracks. First Roy's, now Sir Reginald." He turned toward the door, his expression unreadable. "And they will not stop." The house had never felt so still. Then, from the hallway, hurried footsteps sounded, Hastings returning with Dr. Langley. Poirot's eyes flickered toward the door. Somewhere in this house a murderer was watching, waiting, and they had just made their second move. Chapter 6. A false confession. The household had not yet settled from the shock of Sir Reginald's poisoning, when another disturbance arose, one that sent a ripple of fresh intrigue through the already tangled case. Eleanor Colthorpe, pale and trembling, burst into the drawing-room, her hands clutched tightly together.
"I did it!" she cried. "I killed Edgar Royce!" The room fell into stunned silence. Hastings, who had been pacing by the window, turned sharply. Poirot, seated in an armchair, merely raised an eyebrow. Sir Reginald, still weak but recovering,
frowned deeply. "Eleanor, what nonsense is this?" She shook her head, stepping forward. "It's not nonsense. I went to the study that night. I shot him." "There's no need for any more investigating, Monsieur Poirot." Her voice wavered slightly. "You've found your murderer." Poirot studied her with quiet intensity. The others in the room, Clara, Major Stern, Miss Harborough, were frozen, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief. Poirot stood slowly, adjusting his cuffs with great deliberation. "Mademoiselle," he said gently, "I must ask, why do you confess now when all evidence points elsewhere?" She lifted her chin, though her hands still shook. "Because I can't bear the suspense any longer. The guilt, it's unbearable." Poirot tilted his head. "Guilt or fear?" She hesitated. I don't know what you mean." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so that only she could hear. "You are protecting someone, n'est-ce pas?" Her breath hitched. "No," she whispered. But Poirot saw the flicker of something. Doubt? Desperation? Sir Reginald exhaled
sharply. "This is absurd. Eleanor, you are overwrought. You would never—" But Eleanor pressed on. "I took the gun from the cabinet earlier in the evening," she said, her voice growing steadier, as if she had rehearsed the words. "I went to Edgar's study after dinner. He was threatening to expose something that would ruin our family." She turned to Poirot. "So I shot him," Poirot sighed. "And you ensured that the door was locked from the inside? That the gun was wiped clean of fingerprints?"
She faltered. I don't remember." He turned abruptly to Hastings. "And where was the bullet found?" Hastings blinked. "In the wall behind the desk." Poirot nodded. "And if Mademoiselle Colthorpe fired the shot, the bullet would have struck the wall at an angle from where she stood, yes?" Eleanor's lip trembled. Poirot turned back to her, his voice calm but firm. "Yet the angle of entry suggests the shooter stood much closer to the victim, not across the room." He took a step toward her. "Mademoiselle, you did not kill." Edgar Roy's tears welled in her eyes. "You don't know that." "I do." Poirot's voice softened. "But I must ask you, who are you trying to protect?" A sob caught in her throat. Her gaze darted to Sir Reginald, to Clara, to Major Stern, then to the ground. She shook her head, silent. Poirot did not press further. He had what he needed. The room remained tense as Eleanor turned away, pressing a hand to her mouth as she stumbled toward the door. Poirot gestured to Hastings, who followed her out. Sir Reginald exhaled heavily. "Poirot, you see now, this affair is tearing us apart." Poirot steepled his fingers. "Oui, it is indeed an affair most delicate." He glanced at Miss Harborough, who had been unusually quiet. "Mademoiselle, you have not spoken." She flinched. I don't know what to say." Poirot smiled faintly. "Then let us listen instead." At that moment, a soft knock came at the door, and Annie, the maid, stepped in hesitantly. "Begging your pardon, sir," she said, twisting her apron between her fingers. "But I thought you ought to know. I heard something. The night of the murder." All eyes turned to her. Poirot's interest sharpened. "Go on, mademoiselle." She swallowed. "I was clearing the upstairs landing near the back stairwell." "The one that leads down to the study," Poirot nodded. "And what did you hear?" She hesitated. "An argument. Mr. Royce was speaking to someone." Poirot's gaze flickered. "A woman?" Annie shook her head. "No, sir. A man." A murmur ran through the room. Clara sat bolt upright. "A man?" "Yes, miss," Annie confirmed. "I didn't hear everything, but Mr. Royce sounded angry. He said something about not going through with it and you'll regret this." Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings, who had returned and was listening intently. "And the voice of the other man?" Poirot prompted. "Did you recognize it?" Annie shook her head. "It was low, quiet, almost threatening."
Poirot tapped a finger against his chin.
Très intéressant. Major Stern shifted uncomfortably. Miss Harborough's hands clenched. Sir Reginald's face was unreadable. Poirot turned to Hastings. We must now observe, mon ami. The truth is close. And so he prepared his next move. That evening, Poirot made an announcement at dinner. Mes amis, I have received new information, a letter. Clara looked up sharply. A letter? Poirot smiled. Oui, a letter written by Edgar Royce, a rather revealing one. A tense silence followed. Hastings watched the room closely. Poirot's words had had their intended effect. Someone here was nervous. Sir Reginald's grip on his glass tightened. Major Stern's face was carefully blank. Miss Harborough's fork remained poised mid-air. And Eleanor was staring at Poirot in sheer terror. Poirot let the moment hang, then sat back with a satisfied nod. Tomorrow I shall read it.
Aloud, then he waited to see who would panic first.
Chapter 7. The Butler Knows More. The household had retired for the evening, yet the air remained thick with unease. Poirot had cast his stone into the still waters, and now he waited for the ripples to reveal the truth. The mention of a supposed letter had struck a nerve. He had seen it in their faces. Now he and Hastings sat in the dimly lit study, their voices low. It was quite the effect you had at dinner, Hastings remarked, stretching his legs. I thought Miss Colthorpe would faint on the spot. Poirot nodded, absently straightening an already perfectly aligned inkwell on the desk. Oui, mon ami, but it is not Miss Colthorpe I wish to rattle. It is someone else, someone who fears what may be uncovered. There was a quiet knock at the door. Poirot called out, and the butler, Mr. Godfrey, entered with his usual dignified air. He cleared his throat. I hope I am not disturbing you, sir, but I thought it best to speak with you privately. Poirot gestured to a chair. Please, Monsieur Godfrey, sit. What troubles you? The butler hesitated before lowering himself onto the chair opposite Poirot. I have been in Sir Reginald's employ for nearly 2 decades, he began.
It is not my place to interfere in family affairs, but this business... He shook his head. It is not right. Poirot leaned forward. Go on. Godfrey inhaled deeply. Mr. Royce had been here before, twice in fact. Hastings sat
up. Before the night of the murder? Yes, sir. The first time was perhaps a month ago. He arrived unannounced and demanded to see Sir Reginald. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And how did Sir Reginald receive him? Godfrey hesitated. Poorly, sir. They spoke in the study, and while I did not eavesdrop, I could not help but hear raised voices. Mr. Royce was threatening him. Poirot's fingers steepled. Threatening him, you are sure? Yes, sir. He said something to the effect of, You cannot hide from this forever, and I will make sure the truth comes out. Hastings let out a low whistle. That hardly sounds like a cordial visit. Godfrey's expression darkened. Sir Reginald was furious. He ordered Mr. Royce out and told me never to let him set foot in this house again. Poirot tapped his chin. Yet he returned? Godfrey nodded. Only a week later. I did not announce him. He let himself in through the servants' entrance. I found him in the hallway, asking for Miss Clara. Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. And did he see her? I do not believe so. I informed him that she was indisposed and asked him to leave. He seemed unsettled, almost desperate. Poirot studied him. And do you believe, monsieur,
Godfrey, that his visit concerned Miss Clara or Sir Reginald? The butler's expression was unreadable. "I believe, sir, that Mr. Royce's business was with Sir Reginald all along."
A silence fell. Poirot sat back, fingers drumming against the arm of his chair. And did Sir Reginald ever speak of these visits? No, sir. But the day after Mr. Royce's first visit, Sir Reginald locked himself in the study for hours. He burned a stack of papers in the fireplace. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Burned papers, you say?" "Yes, sir. I swept the ashes myself." There was very little left, but I did notice something strange. Poirot nodded encouragingly. A piece of the parchment had not been completely consumed. There was a fragment of writing left on it. "Only a few letters, but they stood out to me." Poirot leaned forward. "And what were they?" "R&D, sir." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Curieux?" Hastings frowned. "It could mean anything." Poirot stood abruptly. "Non, mon ami, it could mean something very particular." He turned back to Godfrey. "You have been most helpful, monsieur. There is one last thing. When you admitted Mr. Royce on his first visit, did you notice if he carried anything with him?" Godfrey hesitated. "A leather folio, sir." Poirot smiled. "Bon, that will be all for now." As soon as Godfrey departed, Hastings shook his head. "Do you think the burnt papers were connected to Royce's threats?" Poirot's expression was unreadable. "Perhaps. But there is another question, mon ami. Why did Royce return if Sir Reginald had already turned him away?" Hastings scratched his chin. "Perhaps he had new leverage. Or perhaps," Poirot murmured, "he had proof of something Sir Reginald wished to remain hidden." The next morning, Poirot requested access to the fireplace in Sir Reginald's study. He sifted through the fine layer of soot, retrieving the unburnt fragment Godfrey had mentioned. The letters R and D were still visible. Hastings peered over his shoulder. "It's not much." Poirot smiled. "And yet it may be everything." He moved to the bookshelf, running his fingers along the spines until he found what he was looking for. An old, dust-covered ledger. He flipped through its brittle pages, eyes scanning the entries. Then he stopped. Hastings leaned in. "What
"Is it?" Poirot pointed to a name, or rather half a name. "A legal document was removed from this ledger, mon ami, and I believe I know what it was." Hastings frowned. "What?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A record of birth." Hastings blinked.
You mean someone in this house is not who they claim to be?" Poirot finished. A sharp gasp from the doorway made them both turn. Miss Harborough stood there, her face pale. Poirot smiled. "Mademoiselle, how fortunate you should join us." Chapter 8. The Affair and the Fake. "Suicide, miss." Harborough hesitated in the doorway, her face ashen. Poirot's words had struck their mark. He turned to her, his expression mild yet expectant. "Mademoiselle," he said, closing the ledger with deliberate care. "It is always interesting when someone reacts before they have been accused of anything." She swallowed, her hand tightening on the doorknob. I didn't mean to eavesdrop." Poirot smiled. "And yet you heard something that alarmed you? Was it the mention of a hidden birth record, perhaps?" Her fingers trembled, but she lifted her chin. "That's nonsense." "Is it?" Poirot stepped forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "Or is it the reason Edgar Royce came here, to use his knowledge of an old scandal to his advantage?" Miss Harborough's mouth parted, as if she might deny it, but then she faltered. Poirot's voice dropped to a near whisper.
"Tell me, mademoiselle, what do you know of Sir Reginald's past?" Her shoulders slumped. "Only what I've heard whispered," she admitted. "There was a woman, long before Lady Lexham, It was said Sir Reginald cared for her deeply.
But something happened. She disappeared from his life. Hastings frowned. And was there a child? I don't know, she said, her voice barely audible. Poirot studied her for a moment, then gave a slight nod. Merci, mademoiselle. She lingered a moment longer, as if considering whether to say more, then turned and left the room. Hastings let out a breath. Do you think she was telling the truth? Poirot smiled faintly. She told us exactly what she knew, or, at least, what she was willing to admit. He reopened the ledger, his fingers tracing the empty space where a page had been carefully removed. A birth record. Someone had gone to great lengths to erase the past. That evening, Poirot made another discovery. While examining Sir Reginald's study, he noticed a small keyhole hidden beneath the ornate carving of the desk. With a deft touch, he pressed a thin blade into it, and with a quiet click, a concealed drawer slid open. Inside lay a pistol. Poirot
Lifted it carefully, his eyes narrowing. Hastings, mon ami, he said. This is most interesting. Hastings leaned in. Another gun? Poirot turned the weapon in his hand.
Oui, but this one was never fired. Hastings frowned. Then it's not the murder weapon? No. But consider, mon ami, why hide an unused pistol? They examined it closely. The make and model were different from the gun that had killed Edgar Roy's. More curiously, the initials H.L. were engraved on the handle. Hastings furrowed his brow. H.L. Harold Lexam? Poirot nodded. The very same. But why would Sir Reginald have his lawyer's gun? That, mon ami, is the question. Poirot placed the weapon carefully back in its hiding place. There was a larger puzzle at play here. 2 guns, 1 used, and 1 hidden. A blackmailer dead, a family secret buried, and the truth just out of reach. Poirot needed more information, and so the next morning he requested a private conversation with Harold Lexam. The lawyer arrived in the study, his usually composed manner slightly strained. Poirot gestured for him to sit. Monsieur Lexam, Poirot began, I have made a most curious discovery. Tell me, does this belong to you? He produced the hidden pistol. Lexam's face paled. Where did you find that? Poirot tilted his head. That is not an answer. Lexam hesitated, then exhaled sharply. Yes, it's mine. Or rather, it was. Hastings leaned forward. You mean you lost it? Lexam's lips pressed into a thin line. It went missing weeks ago. I assumed I had misplaced it, but... His eyes flickered to Poirot. You found it in Sir Reginald's possession, didn't you? Poirot inclined his head. Lexam exhaled. Then I can only assume.
He took it. Why would Sir Reginald take your gun, monsieur? Lexam hesitated. I don't know.
Come now, Poirot chided gently. A lawyer is careful with his words. You suspect something, Lexam swallowed. Sir Reginald, he was under pressure. There was something he was trying to keep buried. He had spoken to me about certain
legal arrangements, hypothetical ones, he claimed. Hastings frowned. Hypothetical? Lexam nodded. He wanted to know if a document, say a birth record, could be erased from legal records without a trace. Poirot's gaze sharpened.
And what did you tell him? Lexam hesitated. That it was possible, but difficult, and certainly not foolproof. Poirot leaned back.
And shortly after that, Edgar Roy's arrived. Lexam's jaw tightened. Sir Reginald was being blackmailed, was he not? Poirot asked quietly. Lexam hesitated. I cannot say. You mean you will not say? Poirot's voice was
gentle but firm. Lexam sighed. Sir Reginald was a proud man. If there was something to hide, he would have done whatever it took to keep it buried. Poirot tapped a finger against the desk. And yet Royce ended up dead. Lexam's expression darkened. If Sir Reginald did kill him, then it was to protect something bigger than himself. Poirot steepled his fingers. Tell me, monsieur, was Sir Reginald capable of murder? Lexam hesitated. I never thought so. But if a secret that dangerous was at stake, perhaps. Poirot studied him for a long moment. Then quietly he said, And yet, monsieur, I do not believe Sir Reginald killed Edgar Royce. Lexam stiffened. Then who? Poirot's voice was calm. The real question, mon cher, is not who, but why. A silence stretched between them. Poirot's mind worked rapidly. The false suicide, the missing birth record, the hidden gun. It all pointed to something deeper than a mere blackmail scheme. Someone had silenced Edgar Royce before he could expose the truth. And that meant the killer was still among them. Chapter 9. The Murderer's Mistake. The drawing-room was silent save for the steady ticking of the mantel clock. Violet Harborough sat stiffly in her chair, her fingers curled tightly around the embroidered handkerchief in her lap. Across from her, Poirot regarded her with quiet intensity, his fingertips pressed together in deep contemplation. Mademoiselle, he said at last, permit me to ask you again, when did you first become aware of the deceased's presence?
in this house. Violet's gaze flickered toward the window, though she kept her expression composed. As I told you before, I overheard him speaking with Sir Reginald the evening he arrived. Ah, yes, Poirot nodded. But there is a small detail that puzzles me. He leaned forward ever so slightly. You referred to the man as Edgar Royce.
She gave a start, so slight it might have gone unnoticed, but Poirot did not miss such things. Well, yes, she said quickly. That was his name, wasn't it? Poirot tilted his head. Indeed, but you see, mademoiselle, his full name was never mentioned in your presence. There was a pause, a single heartbeat of hesitation. Then she let out a quiet laugh, though it was slightly strained. That's hardly suspicious, Monsieur Poirot. It must have been said at some point. I
only remembered it afterward.
Ah, but that is just it, Poirot said softly, his eyes bright with intelligence. No one in this household knew his surname, save for Sir Reginald and perhaps his lawyer. To all others he was merely the man who visited. And yet you addressed him by his full name without a moment's thought. A slight flush crept up her neck. I don't see what you're implying. Poirot regarded her in silence, then gave a small nod. Very well. Perhaps I am mistaken. He rose, adjusting the lapels of his jacket. Merci, mademoiselle, for your patience. Violet exhaled, clearly relieved, and rose as well. But Poirot's sharp gaze followed her as she turned away. Later, that evening, Poirot found Hastings in the study, deep in thought. Hastings, mon ami, I require your assistance. Hastings looked up, eager. Of course, Poirot. What do you need? Poirot's eyes twinkled. I wish to conduct a small experiment. An experiment? Oui. You will make an announcement at dinner. You will say quite casually that I have made an astonishing discovery. I have found the missing money. Hastings frowned. But Poirot, what missing money? Poirot smiled. Precisely, mon ami, there is no missing money. Hastings blinked. Then why are we saying there is? Poirot placed a hand on Hastings's shoulder. Because the
murderer believes there was. Understanding flickered in Hastings's eyes. Ah, you expect them to react? Poirot nodded. A criminal makes mistakes, mon ami, and the greatest mistake? It is the fear of being caught. At dinner, Hastings
played his part well. Between bites of roast lamb, he set down his fork and said, as if in passing, "Oh, by the way, Poirot's found the missing money." There was a sharp clatter as someone's fork hit their plate. Poirot did not even need to turn his head to see who it was. Violet Harborough sat frozen, her hand trembling ever so slightly as she reached for her wine glass. Across the table, Major Stern's bushy eyebrows shot up. Money? What money? Poirot dabbed at his lips with his napkin, his expression serene. Ah, but it is nothing, Major, merely a detail of interest. Violet swallowed hard, her gaze darting around the room. Then quite suddenly she pushed back her chair. Excuse me, she murmured, rising abruptly. I feel unwell. She left the room in haste. Poirot's eyes met Hastings's and the corners of his lips twitched in satisfaction. Did you see that, Hastings? Poirot murmured. Hastings nodded. She practically bolted. Poirot sighed. Mais oui, because you see, mon ami, there never was any money. Hastings leaned in. Then why did she react? Poirot took a sip of his wine. Because she believed Edgar Royce had stolen something, and now she fears it has been found. A heavy silence settled over the table. Poirot leaned back, the weight of certainty settling in his mind. The truth was close, so very close, and soon he would have it. Chapter 10. The unexpected twist. The heavy velvet drapes muffled the sound of the evening wind, casting the study in deep shadows. Poirot stood by the fireplace, toying with his pocket watch, his sharp eyes moving between the figures before him. Sir Reginald paced restlessly, his fists clenched, while Harold Lexam sat rigid in an armchair, his usual composure replaced by a pale, drawn expression. Hastings, standing by the desk, exchanged a glance with Poirot, awaiting the inevitable storm. Sir Reginald turned suddenly, his voice low and tense. "Are you telling me, Poirot, that you found this—" He held up a small, gleaming cufflink between his thumb and forefinger. "In Lexam's pocket?" "Oui, monsieur." Poirot's voice was calm, measured. The second cufflink, matching. "The one found near the body of Edgar Royce," Lexam exhaled sharply. "This is preposterous! I've never seen that before in my life." Sir Reginald took a step closer. "Then how did it end up in your pocket?" Lexam's mouth opened, then closed again. A single bead of sweat trickled down his temple. Poirot gave a small sigh, shaking his head. "Let us not be so quick to assign blame, messieurs. I have observed many things in this house, and I begin to see the picture quite clearly." He tapped the cufflink against his palm. This small piece of jewelry, it is merely a clue, but there is something far more important, something that someone has been hiding." Sir Reginald stiffened. "What do you mean?" Poirot turned his gaze toward him. "You have not been entirely truthful with me, Sir Reginald." There was a brief, charged silence. The older man's face darkened. He caught himself, his jaw tightening. Hastings watched in fascination. Poirot's methods were always impeccable, pressing just enough, revealing just enough, until the truth unravelled itself. Poirot took a step forward. "You knew Edgar Royce?" Sir Reginald shook his head. "I told you I'd never met the man before that night." "Non, non, non," Poirot said, wagging a finger. "That is what you told me, but it is not the truth." Sir Reginald's
mouth set in a thin line. Poirot continued. You had met him before. In fact, you knew exactly why he came here, and you knew precisely what he wanted. Lexam exhaled sharply. For God's sake, Reginald, if there's something you're hiding, tell him now.
Sir Reginald's gaze flickered toward Poirot, then away. Poirot tilted his head. Edgar Royce came here with a purpose, n'est-ce pas? And he came prepared to threaten you. Sir Reginald let out a slow breath, his shoulders sinking slightly. Yes, he admitted. He did. Hastings frowned. But why? Sir Reginald turned toward the fireplace, staring into the dying embers. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy. Because he knew something about me. Something from the past. Poirot folded his arms. Ah, and what was this something? A long pause. Then very quietly, Sir Reginald said that I had another son. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Hastings sucked in a breath. Poirot nodded, unsurprised. A son, born of an affair. Sir Reginald's expression darkened. Yes, many years ago it was a mistake. One I thought had been buried. But Edgar Royce somehow knew. He had proof. Hastings's mind whirled. Then, was he blackmailing you? Sir Reginald nodded, grimly. Yes. He wanted money, a considerable amount. His jaw tightened. I refused. He threatened to expose me. Poirot tapped his chin thoughtfully. And so, monsieur, I ask you, what happened next? Sir Reginald turned, his eyes hard. I told him to get out. That was the last I saw of him. Poirot raised a brow. Are you quite certain? Sir Reginald's mouth thinned. I had nothing to do with his death, Poirot. Poirot watched him for a long moment, then sighed. Perhaps. Lexam, who had been sitting in silence, let out a breath. Then if Reginald isn't the murderer, why was that cufflink in my pocket? Poirot turned toward him, his gaze sharp. That, Mr. Lexam, is the question. And I intend to find out. The clock on the mantel struck 11. Poirot took a step back, his hands folded neatly before him. The truth is close, he murmured. But there is still a missing piece. And until I find it, I cannot say with certainty who truly killed Edgar Royce. A tense silence settled over the room. Poirot glanced at Hastings. Come, mon ami. Tomorrow we shall have our answers. And with that, he turned on his heel and left. Chapter 11, The Trap, is set. The morning sun filtered weakly through the heavy curtains of the drawing-room, casting long streaks of gold across the polished mahogany table. The air inside was thick with tension, as the household gathered once more, each face carefully composed, yet betraying unease in the flicker of an eye or the twitch of a mouth. Poirot, seated in an armchair near the fireplace, smoothed an invisible crease on his cuff before clasping his hands together. Hastings stood to his right, alert as ever, while Inspector Meadows leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room like a hawk awaiting its prey. Sir Reginald sat stiffly, his fingers drumming against the armrest of his chair, while Harold Lexam occupied the seat opposite him, a thin sheen of sweat glistening at his temple. Clara Langley perched on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her face pale. Miss Harborough, normally composed and unshakable, sat bolt upright, her lips pressed into a thin line. Mr. Godfrey, the butler, stood discreetly near the door, expression unreadable. Poirot let the silence stretch before he finally spoke. Mes amis, I have gathered you here because the mystery is solved. His voice, usually measured and light, carried a quiet finality. A murmur rippled through the group. Sir Reginald let out a sharp breath. "Then why are we sitting here? If you know the killer, why not just say the name?" Poirot smiled faintly.
"Ah, but you see, that would be too simple, would it not?" He steepled his fingers. No, before I reveal the identity of the murderer, I must first conduct a final experiment."
Lexam let out a sharp laugh, though there was little humour in it. "An experiment, Poirot?" "Oui, monsieur. A simple test, to confirm what my little grey cells already know." The room held its breath. Poirot leaned forward slightly. "You... See, there is one last thing I must clarify. The whereabouts of the missing envelope." A hush fell over the room. Hastings blinked. "The missing envelope? Ah, Hastings, do you not recall? The letter that Edgar Royce carried, the one containing the proof of Sir Reginald's secret." Poirot's eyes flickered toward the older man. "A letter that vanished after his murder." Clara swallowed. "But you said it had been burned." Poirot
nodded. "Indeed, part of it was, but the contents? They remain somewhere in this house."
A sharp inhale from Miss Harborough. Poirot continued, his voice deceptively mild. "Last night I searched for it, but did not find it. But today I believe I shall have better luck." Sir Reginald exhaled sharply. "And how do you intend to do that?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "By simply saying that I have already found it." Silence. A single second passed. Then another. And then Miss Harborough let out a strangled gasp and collapsed forward in a dead faint. Clara
shrieked, jumping to her feet.
Hastings rushed forward, as did Lexam, but Poirot simply sat back, satisfied. "Ah," he murmured, "my little grey cells confirm it." The room erupted into chaos. Hastings and Lexam helped ease Miss Harborough back onto the sofa while Clara fanned her, her hands shaking. Sir Reginald stood abruptly, looking from Poirot to the unconscious woman, his mouth opening and closing in stunned realization. Poirot rose gracefully to his feet, smoothing his waistcoat. "It seems, mes amis, that we now have the final proof we need." Inspector Meadows stepped forward, his expression dark. "You mean to say—" "We, Inspector." It was Miss Harborough. A collective gasp. Sir Reginald's voice was hoarse.
"That's impossible." Poirot shook his head. "No, Sir Reginald, it is not impossible. It is simply the truth." Miss Harborough stirred then, her eyelids fluttering open. For a moment she looked dazed, confused even. But when her gaze
met Poirot's, something shifted. The room was utterly still as she slowly sat up, smoothing her skirt, regaining her composure. And then, in a voice that was strangely calm, she said, "You always were too clever, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot's expression did not change. "Merci, mademoiselle." A tense beat, then Sir Reginald exhaled, running a hand down his face. "But why?" Miss Harborough straightened. She looked almost regal, her features tight but composed. "Because Edgar Royce was a liar and a fraud." Poirot lifted a brow. "And he was about to expose you." Miss Harborough's jaw tightened. Hastings blinked. "But I don't understand. Why would he expose her?" Poirot turned slightly. "Because, Hastings, Miss Harborough was not who she claimed to be. In truth, she was the mother of the illegitimate child." A stunned silence. Poirot's gaze bore into hers. "And Edgar Royce knew it." Miss Harborough lifted her chin. "He threatened me," she admitted. "He told me he had proof, documents, letters. He wanted money, and if I didn't give it to him, he would tell everyone." She let out a small laugh, though it lacked any humour. "So I did what I had to do." Lexam's voice was hollow. "You killed him." She did not deny it. Poirot nodded slightly. "And you did it cleverly. You stole the gun from Lexam's desk, waited until Royce was alone in the study, and shot him. Then you burned part of the letter and took the rest, hiding it on your person until you could dispose of it properly." She exhaled. "And I almost succeeded." Poirot nodded. "Almost." There was a long silence. And then Inspector Meadows stepped forward. "Miss Harborough, I'm afraid you'll have to come with me." She rose, her expression unreadable. "Of course." As she allowed herself to be led away, Poirot let out a slow breath. He turned back to the remaining occupants of the room. "And so, mes amis, the case is closed." Sir Reginald sat heavily, in his chair, rubbing his temples. Clara looked shaken, her hands still trembling. Lexam exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Hastings let out a low whistle. "I must say, Poirot, you certainly do know how to set a trap." Poirot gave a small smile, brushing a speck of dust from his sleeve. "Ah, Hastings, the truth, it always reveals itself in the end." Chapter 12. The real motive. A hush settled over the drawing-room, thick with the weight of revelation. Even with Miss Harborough escorted away, the atmosphere remained tense, as though an invisible thread still bound the occupants to some yet unsolved mystery. Poirot, ever composed, sat back in his chair, his fingertips lightly pressed together. His little grey cells had done their work, and yet there remained a final thread to unravel. Sir Reginald, still pale from the shock of Miss Harborough's confession, exhaled heavily. "So that's it, then?" "It was all about the child, the blackmail, the murder?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "No, Sir Reginald. That is where you are mistaken. The child, the scandal, they were motives for Miss Harborough, but not the full picture, the true crime, the one that sealed Edgar. Royce's fate was something far more dangerous." Hastings, who had been standing at Poirot's shoulder, frowned. "But she admitted to killing him, Poirot. What else could there be?" Poirot gave him a knowing glance. "You are thinking in a straight line, mon ami, when you should be thinking in a circle. Miss Harborough was desperate, yes, but she did."
Not act alone. She was covering for someone else. There was a sharp intake of breath. Sir Reginald's fingers curled over the armrest of his chair.
"You don't mean—" Poirot inclined his head. "Oui, there is another player in this game, one who had much to lose if Edgar Royce had spoken out. Miss Harborough's secret was merely an opportunity for leverage, but the real crime, the real motive, lies elsewhere." A low cough interrupted him. The group turned to see Major Stern standing near the fireplace, his usually ruddy face paler than before. "This is preposterous," he said, his voice carefully measured. "If Miss Harborough has confessed, then what more is there to say?" Poirot studied him. "Ah, Major Stern. You ask a question to which you already know the answer. That is most interesting." Stern stiffened. "I have no idea what you mean." Poirot tilted his head, his voice light, but unwavering. "Edgar Royce knew something more than Miss Harborough's indiscretion, n'est-ce pas? He had discovered another deception, one that went deeper, one that concerned not just an illegitimate child, but an entire identity. He found out about—"
"You." Silence. Stern's face was rigid, but Poirot saw the faintest flicker in his eyes, the barest hesitation. He continued, "You see, mes amis, Edgar Royce had a skill beyond blackmail. He was observant, he listened, and, most importantly,
he checked details, and when he checked yours, Major Stern, he found them lacking." Stern let out a short, forced laugh. Checked my details? What are you implying? Poirot leaned forward slightly. I am saying, mon cher Major, that you are not who you claim to be. A murmur rippled through the room. Sir Reginald sat forward, his expression dark. Poirot's voice was quiet but firm. You are not Major Lionel Stern of the British Army. A strangled sound came from Clara, who clapped a hand to her mouth. Stern took a step back, his mouth opening as though to protest, but Poirot pressed on. The real Major Stern died 5 years ago under tragic circumstances, and yet, mon cher impostor, you arrived here 2 years later, conveniently assuming his identity. You played the role well, a decorated officer, a charming guest at every gathering. But you made one error, mon ami. You did not expect someone like Edgar Royce to take an interest in your past. Stern's lips pressed together. This is absurd. You have no proof. Poirot sighed. No, but I do. He turned slightly. Hastings, mon ami, do you recall what we found in Edgar Royce's desk? Hastings frowned. There were some letters. A notebook. Precisely. And in that notebook, Edgar Royce had recorded something curious, something he had overheard, but not fully understood at the time. Poirot turned back to Stern. It was a conversation, a single sentence, muttered when you thought no one was listening. You said, it was never meant to go this far. Stern's nostrils flared. Poirot's voice softened, but it carried no sympathy. You see, you began with small forgeries, no? A signature here, an altered date there. But you did not stop, Major Stern, if I may still call you that. You expanded, and you found the perfect opportunity in Sir Reginald, a wealthy man with vast estates and complicated finances. He was easy to manipulate. You siphoned funds little by little, always careful, always just enough to remain unnoticed. Sir Reginald surged to his feet, his face thunderous. You were stealing from me. Stern's eyes flicked toward him, but he did not respond. Poirot nodded. Oui, Sir Reginald, small amounts perhaps at first, but then Edgar Royce, he noticed, and he confronted you, Clara whispered. That's why he was killed. Poirot shook his head. No, mademoiselle, Edgar Royce did not confront him. He confronted Miss Harborough, believing her to be part of the scheme, and in a way she was protecting him, though I suspect she did not know the full extent
of his crimes. Stern's voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet but sharp. This is all speculation. Poirot raised a finger. Ah!
But the cufflink, Major. A flicker of something passed over Stern's face. Poirot smiled slightly. Yes, the cufflink. The one we found in Harold Lexham's pocket. You assumed, perhaps, that it was planted to frame him? But no, the real mistake was yours. You see, when you stood over Edgar Royce's body, you must have felt something small fall from your sleeve.
A cufflink? But you did not notice because you were too concerned with making it look like a robbery. And when you returned to retrieve it later, it was already gone. Poirot exhaled. Miss Harborough shot Edgar Royce, yes, but you, Major
Stern, created the situation that led to his death. And more than that, you tried to cover it up. You let her take the blame, all while keeping your own hands clean. The room was utterly still. Poirot turned to Inspector Meadows. I believe, Inspector, that you will find the necessary proof if you search his quarters. Forged documents, perhaps a false passport. He paused, then added, and I suspect the last page of Edgar Royce's letter. Stern's jaw clenched, and Poirot saw the subtle shift in his posture, the slight movement toward the door. Hastings caught it too, and before Stern could make his escape, the inspector stepped forward, firm. "I think you'll be coming with me, Major Stern." A long silence. Then finally, Stern exhaled, shoulders slumping. His expression, once carefully composed, had cracked. He said nothing as the inspector took his arm as he was led away. Poirot glanced at Sir Reginald. The older man looked weary, as though the weight of the truth had aged him. Clara, still stunned, turned to Poirot. "How did you know?" Poirot gave a small smile. "Ah, mademoiselle, it is always the details. A man may disguise his name, his past, even his face. But he cannot change the small things, the way he reacts, the things he says when he believes no one is listening." Hastings let out a breath. "And to think it all started with a single blackmail." Poirot nodded. "Oui, mon ami, a single crime revealing a much greater one." And with that, the case was closed. Chapter 13. The Proof and the Alibi. Collapse S. The last echoes of Major Stern's footsteps faded down the corridor. A strange silence settled over the room. Poirot sat back, steepling his fingers, as his sharp gaze swept over the remaining faces. Though the Major had been taken into custody, there were still loose ends to be tied, details that had not yet been spoken aloud. Sir Reginald let out a breath, rubbing his temples. "I still cannot believe it. The man lived under my roof for years. I trusted him. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "I should have known. I should have seen it." Poirot lifted
a hand. No, mon cher. You are too harsh upon yourself. A man like Stern, he was clever, oui?
He understood how to play his role, to be charming, to be trustworthy. But even the cleverest of impostors make mistakes. And, as I have said before, it is the small things that betray them. Clara, who had been silent until now, frowned. "But something still doesn't make sense. Miss Harborough shot Edgar Royce, didn't she? You said it yourself." Poirot nodded. "Oui, that much is true. But tell me, mademoiselle, when a crime is committed, does it not sometimes require more than one hand?" Hastings, standing beside the mantelpiece, straightened. "You mean Major Stern helped her?" A small, knowing smile touched Poirot's lips. "Ah, mon ami, you are thinking again in a straight line. No, Major Stern did not help Miss Harborough. In fact, he did not even know of her intent to kill Edgar Royce, at least not until after it was done." Clara's brow furrowed. "But if that's the case, then why did he try to cover it up? If Miss Harborough acted alone, why go to such lengths?" Poirot's expression softened slightly. "Because, mademoiselle, the moment Edgar Royce died, Major Stern knew that his own secrets were at risk. He had been careful, meticulous even, but Royce had uncovered too much, and so, when he realized the man was dead, he saw an opportunity." Sir Reginald frowned. "An opportunity?" Poirot gestured lightly with one hand. "To frame another, to deflect suspicion, but more than that, to ensure that if the truth ever did come out, he would have a way to escape unscathed." Hastings blinked. "And that's why he tampered with the scene?" "Exactement. He arranged the papers, placed the missing money. He made it look like a simple case of theft gone wrong. And he did something else, mon ami, something that at the time we did not question as deeply as we should have." His eyes swept the room before settling on Harold Lexam, who had been quiet, his hands clasped tightly together in his lap. Poirot's voice was softer now, but no less sharp. "Monsieur Lexam, you provided an alibi for Major Stern, did you not?" Harold swallowed. Yes, of course I did. I told you. He was with me that evening." Poirot gave a small sigh. Ah, but was he? The question hung in the air, pressing down with weighty significance. Harold's fingers tightened around each other, and his eyes darted briefly to Sir Reginald before settling back on Poirot.
I don't understand what you mean. Poirot leaned forward. Let me remind you, mon cher, of what you said when we first questioned you. You claimed that you were with Major Stern for most of the evening, that the two of you had spoken.
At length. And yet, when I asked you later about the details of that conversation, you hesitated. Harold's breath quickened. I just didn't remember. No. Poirot's voice was firm. It was not that you did not remember. It was that there was no conversation at all. You gave Major Stern an alibi because he asked you.
Too, and you did not question it because you trusted him. A murmur ran through the room. Sir Reginald turned sharply to Harold. Is this true? Harold's face had gone white. He opened his mouth, then closed it again.
Finally, he whispered. He said he needed me to, that it was important. Poirot nodded. And so you obliged, thinking nothing of it. But in doing so, mon cher, you unwittingly became part of his deception. Harold's voice shook. I didn't know, I swear I didn't know. Poirot's expression softened, but only slightly. I believe you. But you must understand, Monsieur Lexam, if you had spoken sooner, the truth would have come to light much earlier. Sir Reginald looked grim. Then Stern had no real alibi. He could have been there when Edgar Royce was shot. Hastings frowned. But Miss Harborough pulled the trigger. We already know that. Poirot nodded. Oui, but let me ask you, mon ami, what did we not find on Major Stern? Hastings blinked. Not find? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Gunpowder residue. The room fell silent. Poirot tapped his fingers lightly against the armrest of his chair. When a firearm is discharged at close range, there is always some trace left behind. But when we examined Major Stern's clothing, there was nothing, no residue, no soot, nothing to indicate he had been anywhere near the weapon when it was
fired. Clara looked puzzled. But isn't that proof he wasn't involved?
Poirot shook his head. No, mademoiselle, it is proof that he took great care to conceal his involvement. You see, if he had truly been uninvolved, he would not have thought to check for such details. He would not have gone out of his way to clean his sleeves to ensure that no trace remained. Sir Reginald's voice was quiet, almost resigned. And that means... Poirot exhaled. That means, monsieur, that while Miss Harborough fired the fatal shot, Major Stern was there. He was present. He saw it happen, and instead of stopping it, instead of raising the alarm, he chose to use it to his advantage. A hush fell over the room. Harold swallowed hard. So I gave him an alibi for something he actually did? Poirot inclined his head. You gave him the means to walk away from the crime without suspicion. But do not be too hard on yourself, Monsieur Lexam. You were deceived, as many were. Hastings let out a low whistle. So in the end, he thought of everything. Poirot shook his head. Not everything, mon ami. He thought only of what suited him. He underestimated Miss Harborough's guilt. He underestimated Edgar Royce's meticulous record-keeping, and most importantly, he underestimated me. A small, satisfied smile played on his lips. And that, Hastings, was his greatest mistake. The silence stretched. Then at last, Sir Reginald let out a long breath. I can scarcely believe it's over. Poirot nodded once, gravely. Oui, Sir Reginald, the case, she is closed. And yet, even as the words were spoken, Poirot's gaze flickered, just briefly, to the window. The wind stirred outside, rustling the curtains. Something lingered, still, unseen, a final piece yet to fall into place. Chapter 14. The Killer's Desperation. The hush that had settled over the drawing-room was thick with the weight of revelation. Poirot's words had landed like stones in a still pond, sending ripples of unease through the assembled guests. Major Stern had been unmasked, his careful deception laid bare. And yet there was a tension in the air, something unresolved, something teetering on the edge of action. Sir Reginald let out a long breath, shaking his head as if trying to dispel the ghosts of betrayal. To think that all these years I entertained
A viper under my own roof? Poirot gave a small nod. Oui, Sir Reginald, a most cunning viper indeed. But no matter how cunning the truth, she always finds her way to the light.
The room's attention shifted to Harold Lexam, who sat stiffly in his chair, his hands clutched together as if trying to steady himself. And he swallowed hard. I helped him. I gave him that alibi without even questioning it. If I had just— Poirot lifted a hand. No, Monsieur Lexam. Guilt is a burden you should not carry. You were deceived just as many others were. You had no way of knowing the full extent of his lies. Harold gave a small nod, though his expression remained troubled. From the corner of the room, Clara studied Poirot intently. Then, what happens now? Before Poirot could respond, there was a sharp movement from the other side of the room. Major Stern had been silent for too long. His face, which had previously worn an expression of icy composure, had begun to shift. His lips pressed into a thin line, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscles twitched beneath the skin. A darkness had come over his eyes, something dangerous, something desperate. Poirot caught it at once. He had seen this kind of desperation before, when a man realized there were no more escape routes left. And then it happened. With a sudden, violent motion, Major Stern lunged forward, his hand darting inside his jacket. There was a flash of metal, and in an instant, Poirot saw the gleam of a concealed dagger. A collective gasp filled the room. Poirot did not move. He did not need to, because at that precise moment, as Major Stern's arms swung forward in a last, reckless attempt to silence the man who had unravelled his lies, another force intervened. Hastings. With an instinct that surprised even himself, Hastings sprang forward, his body colliding with Major Stern's in a heavy, forceful tackle. The dagger was wrenched from the man's grip as the two men crashed to the floor, the blade skittering across the polished wood. A sharp grunt of pain escaped Stern's lips as he struggled, but Hastings held firm, pinning him down with the sheer weight of his own determination. "Not so fast, old chap," Hastings panted, tightening his grip as Stern thrashed beneath him. "You've done quite enough damage for one evening." Two footmen, who had been standing by the doorway, rushed forward, at Sir Reginald's sharp command, assisting Hastings in restraining the would-be attacker. Within moments, Stern's wrists were bound, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts as he was hoisted to his feet. Poirot stepped forward, adjusting the cuffs of his sleeves with meticulous care. He regarded Stern with something that was not quite pity, but not quite triumph either. "Ah, Major Stern, you have made a most unfortunate error. You see, when one's lies have been revealed, the worst course of action is to confirm them with further violence." Stern's eyes burned with something venomous. "You think you've won, Poirot?" His voice was hoarse, furious. "You think you—
Know everything? You don't. You never will. Poirot's gaze was unwavering. Ah, but mon cher, it is not I who must know everything. It is justice. And justice she will not be denied.
Sir Reginald turned to one of the footmen. "Fetch Inspector Tilling at once. I believe he will be most interested in what has transpired here." The footman nodded and hurried from the room. For a long moment, silence reigned once more. Poirot turned to Hastings, who was still catching his breath, straightening his jacket with an air of satisfaction. "Mon ami," Poirot said warmly. "Your timing," she was most impeccable. Hastings gave a small chuckle, shaking his head. "Well, I couldn't very well let him run you through, could I?" Poirot placed a hand over his heart. "Ah, Hastings, I am touched. Truly the bond of friendship, she is a remarkable thing." Miss Harborough, who had been standing in a dazed, stunned silence, suddenly let out a small, trembling laugh. All this time, he really thought he could get away with it. Poirot tilted his head slightly. "Non, mademoiselle. He did not think he could get away with it. He was certain of it. And therein lay his downfall." Sir Reginald exhaled heavily. "And to think I let that man handle my accounts."
God knows how much he has stolen from me over the years. Poirot gave a small nod. It will take time to uncover the full extent of his crimes, but rest assured, the truth, she will come to light. From the doorway, a familiar voice rang out. "I
"Believe I just heard my name being called." Inspector Tilling had arrived. His sharp eyes took in the scene, the restrained Major Stern, the discarded dagger, the expressions of shock still lingering on many of the faces. "Good Lord," he muttered. "What in blazes has been happening now?" Poirot spread his hands in an elegant gesture. "Ah, Inspector, I believe I have a most fascinating case to present to you. You see, the crime, she is not so simple as she first appeared." Tilling gave him a weary look. "With you, Poirot, they never are." Poirot smiled. "Indeed. And yet, mon cher, is that not precisely what makes them so interesting?" Tilling sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I suppose you'd better start from the beginning, then." Poirot inclined his head. "Mais bien sûr. And mon cher inspecteur, I assure you this is a tale you will not wish to miss." And with that, the great detective began to recount the story, once more, this time with justice finally within reach. Chapter 15. "Justice, mon ami!" Inspector Tilling listened with his usual blend of skepticism and begrudging admiration as Poirot laid out the entire crime with the precision of a master clockmaker, aligning every cog and gear into its rightful place. The drawing-room, still thick with the remnants of tension from Major Stern's failed attack, had settled into a taut silence, each person hanging on Poirot's words as the final pieces of the puzzle locked into place. "It began, mon cher inspector," Poirot said, his fingertips pressed together, "with a deception most grand. Major Stern was not the man he claimed to be. His identity was a fabrication, a clever masquerade designed to position himself within Sir Reginald's trust. And for a time, it worked." Miss Harborough sat stiffly in her chair, her face pale, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Poirot's gaze flickered over her before he continued. "But deception, she is a fickle mistress. You see, there was one man who discovered the truth, Edgar Royce. He stumbled upon the Major's secret, though at first he may not have understood the full extent of it. What he did recognize, however, was an opportunity. He attempted to use this knowledge to his advantage, turning the information into a tool for extortion." Sir Reginald let out a low murmur. Royce was blackmailing Stern. Oui, monsieur, Poirot confirmed. And a desperate man, when cornered, will do desperate things. Major Stern saw no way out, no way to rid himself of Edgar Royce except by the most final of solutions. Hastings, who had been standing at Poirot's side, gave a sharp intake of breath. So he shot Royce? A small, grave nod. He shot Royce, oui, but not in a fit of passion, not in some hasty act of violence. No, this was planned, calculated. He ensured that the scene would suggest suicide, arranging the body, the pistol, the very atmosphere of the room to convince the eye that Royce had taken his own life.
And for a moment, mes amis, did it not seem so? A hush followed, the weight of Poirot's words settling over the room. Inspector Tilling, arms folded, gave a small nod. Go on, Poirot. There's more, I take it? Poirot allowed himself a small,
satisfied smile. But of course, for a deception to be truly effective, one must be thorough. And Major Stern, though clever, was not quite thorough enough. There were mistakes. Small ones, perhaps, but to Poirot, no mistake is too small. He turned slightly, his gaze locking onto Miss Harborough. And this, mademoiselle, is where you enter our tale. A ripple of unease crossed Miss Harborough's face, and she instinctively recoiled. I don't know what you mean, Poirot tutted softly. Ah, but you do. You see, Major Stern may have been the hand that committed the crime, but you, mademoiselle, were the one who assisted in the concealment. You aided him in destroying evidence. You misled those who might have uncovered the truth too soon.
And yet, Poirot's voice grew softer, almost contemplative. I do not believe you did so out of malice. Miss Harborough's lips parted slightly, her breath shallow. You were protecting him, Poirot continued, his tone now edged.
With something akin to pity, perhaps out of loyalty, perhaps out of love, a sharp intake of breath from Miss Harborough, and for a fleeting moment there was something raw in her expression, something that had long been hidden beneath layers of careful composure. I never wanted this, she choked out. I thought I was helping him. He told me things that made me believe. Her voice wavered, and she looked away. Poirot's expression softened, but only slightly.
And that, mademoiselle, is why you did not burn the final piece of evidence. Miss Harborough's eyes snapped back to him, wide with sudden alarm. What? What do you mean? The handkerchief, Poirot said simply. The one you retrieved from Major Stern the night of the murder. You may have destroyed other things, the powder-stained gloves, the notes that Royce had written, but not the handkerchief. You hesitated. And hesitation, mademoiselle, is most revealing. A sharp silence followed. Miss Harborough's lips trembled.
And then, with a small, shuddering exhale, she bowed her head. Poirot turned back to Inspector Tilling. You will find that this handkerchief, when tested, bears traces of gunpowder. And that, mes amis, will be the final proof. Major Stern, still held firmly by the footman, gave a bitter laugh. You're a clever man, Poirot, I'll give you that. Poirot tilted his head. It is not cleverness, mon cher. It is order and method, always order and method. Inspector Tilling straightened. That settles it, then. Major Stern, you are under arrest for the murder of Edgar Royce. He turned to Miss Harborough, his gaze less severe but no less certain. And you, Miss Harborough, will need to come with me as well. There's much to discuss. She gave a small, weary nod, as though the fight had long since left her. Poirot folded his arms, watching as the final act of justice was set into motion. As Major Stern was led away, the tension in the room seemed to dissolve, replaced by a strange, lingering quiet. Sir Reginald exhaled heavily, sinking into a chair. Good Lord, what a night! Hastings let out a low whistle. I must say, Poirot, that was one of the more dangerous investigations we've had. Poirot gave a modest shrug. Dangerous, perhaps, but also most satisfying. Hastings chuckled. You do
Love a bit of theatrics, don't you? Poirot merely smiled. Ah, mon ami, the truth, she must always be revealed with a touch of flair. And with that, the great detective allowed himself the smallest moment of triumph, knowing that once again
justice had prevailed.